Welcome on into the Utah Blockcast. I'm Steve Bartle, Utah Insider for KSL Sports. This is our Tuesday episode. In Whitt's words, we break down a lot of comments from Kyle Whittingham in his weekly press conference, adding context and, just conversation around some of his comments at his weekly press conference. So obviously this week is a big one for Utah, heading into week 7 and a matchup against the reigning Big 12 champions, Arizona State, who is coming to Salt Lake City this weekend, a night game in Rice-Eccles Stadium. There's going to be a drone show. Interested to see how that looks. But this is a big one for Utah, and obviously Utah is coming off a bye week and a 48-14 win over West Virginia on the road in Morgantown the week before. The Utes are looking to build on momentum, and I think this is a significant test, but a significant opportunity for Utah to generate really positive momentum moving forward into this next phase of the schedule. So in this episode, we've got comments about Arizona State. I think it's pretty clear that there's a great deal of mutual respect between Kyle Whittingham and Kenny Dillingham. We'll also talk about the kind of the surprising update on the injury front, that there's no season-ending injuries, especially I think we all saw that Nate Ritchie injury and figured he would be done. But I think, really interesting to hear that. We'll talk about sort of the plan moving forward, which, it seems like even though it may not be a season-ending injury, it looks like the type that will at least require some time out for Ritchie at safety. So we'll talk about the plan for Utah at that position specifically. We'll also talk about the potential for a redshirt year this year for Byrd Ficklin. Does not sound like that's going to be the plan, so we'll talk about that and Whittingham's comments there. I think there's a lot of context around that decision that I think we'll talk about in this one, which will help people kind of understand the thought process, I think, a little bit more. And then, just to kind of wrap it up, we'll talk about the Big 12 race and what Kyle had to say on that. So, with this Arizona State matchup, this is a big one for both programs. Obviously, Arizona State is coming into this 2-0 in conference play with, pretty valuable wins over Baylor on the road and against TCU last week at home. To have those 2 wins in your back pocket is pretty significant in this Big 12 title race. And for Utah, obviously, 1-1 with the loss to Texas Tech at home, the big win 2 weeks ago against West Virginia. This is a real opportunity for Utah to not only get a pretty valuable win, but it's an opportunity to prove themselves, which is something that Devin Dampier said was pretty important this week for them and the offense and the team overall. So I think this is a pretty significant opportunity. And, Kyle Whittingham had a lot of really great things to say about Arizona State. Obviously, as the reigning champs, to be the champ, you got to beat the champ. That's something that Freddie Whittingham said yesterday, and I think it says everything, right? Arizona State, they're not playing tremendously impressive football, but what they are doing is they're making plays when it matters most. And I think Kenny Dillingham has just done a really good job of building this program and turning it into a winner. This is a program that's figured out how to make plays in the clutch, and that's what we see time and time again. And so Kyle Whittingham opened up his press conference giving the Sun Devils a lot of praise for what they're doing. He said, and I quote, and this is kind of paraphrasing, kind of combining some of the comments here, but he said, the Sun Devils are playing really good football. They've got 2 really outstanding players, number 0, who's Jordan Tyson, the receiver, number 3, Raleek Brown, who's the running back, to go along with their QB, Sam Levitt, and also share that, they've got a really athletic defense, that, the scheme isn't overly complicated. It's not elaborate, but it's just the Sun Devils being really fundamentally sound and being athletic and making plays. And I think that in and of itself is going to present a really tough challenge for Utah this week. When you look at some of the numbers, Tyson himself, going back to the receiver, 483 yards through the air, 7 touchdowns. he's clearly the focal point of the offense, regardless of pass or run. He is the guy that they try to get the ball to, especially in the red zone. He's so dynamic. He's got great size at 6'2", 200 pounds. He's athletic. This is going to be a test on Utah's secondary and for Morgan Scalley and that defensive side of the ball. Obviously, we're all kind of interested in what the plan is going to be to limit him. And I think that's going to be the focal point. You're not going to completely eliminate him or a player of his status, but you just try to limit his success. And I think with what Utah has done this season with the pass rush and limiting the efficiency of opponents' passing games, I think that's going to be the key. And obviously, Smith Snowden is going to be probably play a pretty big role in Utah's ability to limit Jordan Tyson's production this season. So I think we've all got our eyes on Snowden and what he's going to do this weekend. That'll certainly be interesting, but I assume that Scalley's going to have a lot more than just relying on Snowden to limit Tyson there, because Tyson is that good. He is considered by some to be first round talent, and I think he's lived up to it so far. With Raleek Brown, the running back, this is a guy that if you followed Utah recruiting for the last 5 years or so, he's a name that you're fairly familiar with. Coming up through high school, he actually played some ball here in Utah. Was pretty involved with the 7-on-7 teams here, the Level Up, Elites, and those programs. Flirted with Utah when he hit the transfer portal. He ended up at Arizona State prior to last season, but was just dealing with a nagging injury. And he obviously would have added a tremendous element to that rushing attack and complement to Cam Skattebo. But he's picked up where Skattebo left off, essentially taking on, bringing a different identity in terms of the run game. He's a lot more explosive. He's created a lot of big plays, but he's got 506 rushing yards. He's a big component to their passing attack as well. He has 19 receptions on the year. So he's a guy that they're trying to get involved early and often in both phases of the game. Then with Sam Levitt, I had him as the top quarterback in the conference coming into the year. And that was due in large part to just his ability to make plays in crunch time and to lead the Sun Devils to victories last year. He made a number of plays in key moments in big games last year, and I thought that said a lot about who he is as a quarterback. This year he got off to a slow start. It hasn't been as productive as I think many sort of expected from him, but what you're still seeing from Levitt is a lot of big plays. For him, he's totaled 1,039 yards through the air, 8 touchdowns to just 3 interceptions. He's doing a much better job of taking care of the ball. I think those 3 interceptions came within the first 3 games, and he's performed a lot better in conference play against Baylor and TCU. The thing that I think is really interesting when you're talking about Sam Levitt is his ability to make plays when things break down around him. And that's something that, Kyle Whittingham talked about as, a key to limiting Arizona State's success is containing Sam Levitt and not allowing him to make those big plays when he breaks out of the pocket. That's what he's so good at. And he leads the conference in scrambles. He's got 22 scrambles so far. Just for comparison, Devin Dampier is towards the middle of the conference with 12 scrambles. He's accounted for a handful of first downs, creating big plays. I mean, you can go back to that Baylor game. He had a number of, back-breaking scrambles late in that game against the Baylor defense. And I think that's what he's really adept at, is just, stepping up in big moments when his team needs him. And I think that is a special characteristic that not every quarterback has. So that's going to be a tough test for Utah is limiting Sam Levitt. And I think that's going to be a focal point. Now, obviously with Utah and Arizona State, there's a great history, within the last decade between these two programs. There's been a lot of hatred, a lot of respect. Arizona State was one of those teams that, when Utah came into the Pac-12, they bullied Utah in a lot of ways. And for Utah to finally get over the hill, Arizona State was one of those programs that they had to surpass. And as they got into the late 2010s and into the early 2020s, Utah was the one that became the bully. And I think with Kenny Dillingham coming to Tempe, there's a great mutual respect between those two. Coach Dillingham has said a lot of really positive things about Coach Whittingham and the program that he's built. I believe it was year one where he talked about modeling his program at Arizona State after what Kyle Whittingham has done. And for these two coaches, with what Kenny Dillingham has done in 3 years there, Coach Whittingham has taken note of that as well, and had this to say about Coach Dillingham down there and the job that he's doing in Tempe.
How he stayed the course, and because he had some rough spots the first year, things didn't go real well. I think that was the year we beat him 50 something, to not very much his first year, and he also had a few other rough games that year. But I've talked to him a few times, and he's we've conversed, and he's picked my brain a little bit, and just said, hey, if you believe in what you're doing, keep doing it. Don't question yourself. Don't panic. Just keep doing it. He's been doing it, and you can see the progress they've made. So he's stayed the course, I guess, is the best way I can term what he's done.
And I think that that's something that I think Kyle Whittingham, of any coach, is going to respect the most. We've talked so much over the years about trusting the process, respecting the process, and all of those things, right? Coach Whittingham is known for his consistency, the morning workouts each and every day, right? That's the type of thing that is going to get the respect of Coach Whittingham, is staying the course, staying committed to what you're doing. And I think that's what he sees in Coach Dillingham. And you see the success that they're having there in Tempe with Arizona State. So, a lot more to dive into with this matchup, but there's a great deal of respect, obviously, between Utah and Arizona State with these two head coaches. The next big topic, the injuries. I think when Kyle Whittingham shared this update, it caught all of us by surprise. I think we were all anticipating an announcement that Nate Ritchie would be done for the season, that he had suffered a season-ending injury. You go back and you watch that play, and it's pretty tough to watch. It's it's not Tyreek Hill's injury or anything like that, but it was pretty bad. It was close. It was borderline. And I think to hear that it was not a season-ending injury. Coach Whittingham said, and I quote, "None of those injuries suffered in the West Virginia game were season-ending. Going forward, you'll just check the availability report. But again, fortunately, not season-ending. We'll see who we have available." And so obviously we know that Nate Ritchie is the big one there. And we'll talk more about him because, even though it may not be season-ending, I think it's fair to assume that there will be some time missed, given the nature of the injury and the fact he was in a cast and on crutches after the game. At the very least, I think we can expect to not see Ritchie for some time. So we'll talk more about the plan here. But in that West Virginia game, we also saw Jackson Benny and Dallas Vakalahi leave that game with injuries, and none of them, again, season-ending injuries. I think there was some concern about Benny in particular because it was sort of a non-contact injury. But from what I've gathered, it sounds like there's positive news on the injury front where guys, I think the bye week came at just the right time. And I would anticipate that we see some of these guys on the field this week. But obviously, we'll pay attention to the availability report this week and throughout the week to kind of monitor progress. But I would anticipate Utah getting some guys back this weekend for this contest. And then getting into the plan moving forward at safety, with the likelihood that Nate Ritchie is going to miss, an extended amount of time. We saw what the plan was initially in that West Virginia game. Utah turned to freshman Nate Tillman, and, it was a true freshman experience. And I think we all remember Marcus Williams' first start in all the way back in 2013 against Washington State. It was rough. And I think that is something that we need to keep in mind, that even though, first experience, first extended amount of playing time may not have been the prettiest, I think it's important to still look at some of the positives that Tillman showed us against West Virginia. And, with him, he was really good at getting downhill. I thought he provided a good presence tackling. He did have a couple missed tackles, but still, in general, I thought there were good indications of fundamentally sound tackling. Obviously, we all know the blown opportunity and coverage with him dropping into his deep zone in that cover 2 hole shot, and unfortunately just didn't make the play. But I think having that moment in that game is going to be so valuable for him moving forward, right? Because no disrespect to West Virginia, but that was a game that Utah was never threatened in. And so to get that experience in that game where you can learn from it and you now have these tougher tests coming up, I think is a silver lining for Nate Tillman with that. And so obviously the bye week came at just a good time where, he can spend a little extra time with Coach Scally potentially and study film and get prepared for what's to come. Beyond Nate Tillman, Utah, I think it's important to remember Jackson Benny spent most of his first year and even this offseason. It was throughout spring ball that he was still operating as a safety. So there's familiarity there for Benny with that safety position, and Utah can turn to him to potentially fill some snaps at strong safety. And then too, a thing that we've talked about, in other episodes and, in Twitter spaces and all of that sort of thing, is the possibility that Utah moves one of these outside cornerbacks that we haven't seen a lot of inside to safety. And the guy that I've talked about that makes the most sense is somebody that Kyle Whittingham singled out in his press conference as well. And that's Jeremiah Caldwell, Rock Caldwell. He is an addition Utah brought in the December recruiting period. He came from the JUCO ranks, Garden City Community College, which is a program that's produced a lot of D1 talent over the years. And, for him, it's important to understand his background. Rock Caldwell was a highly touted recruit coming out of high school. He was a highly regarded 3-star prospect, ended up signing with Louisville. He then transferred to Bowling Green and then transferred to Garden City. And Rock has good size. He's 6'3". He's 190 pounds. That's a frame that, if you're not playing outside cornerback in this Utah scheme, that's the type of frame and size that Utah loves at that safety position. And for Caldwell, he played a good number of his snaps last year at Garden City at that safety position. So he has familiarity with the position. And I think for him, this is going to be an interesting transition. So obviously playing outside cornerback, you're primarily matched up with wide receivers. And so, that is more lenient on athleticism and technique and utilizing the sideline to help you in gaining leverage. Moving inside to safety, it's, even though you're still a defensive back, the world that you're dealing with and the responsibilities on your plate are completely different. So you're going to go from, matching up with outside receivers on a pretty consistent basis, now moving inside to safety where you could be lined up against a tight end. You could be lined up against, a prototypical outside receiver lining up inside a slot receiver. You're going to be heavily involved in the run game where you are the guy that has to make the play with, defensive ends controlling the edge. You are that playmaker to make plays around the line of scrimmage. And I think that's going to be an interesting process for Caldwell, is how does he handle the physicality and the play in, play out differences that he's going to experience. So that's going to be a process for him. And I think, again, given his background and his familiarity with the position, it's not going to be completely foreign to him, but it is just going to be an adjustment going from Garden City Community College in the JUCO ranks to now the Big 12. So I think that move makes a lot of sense in my mind. with Rock Caldwell potentially moving to safety. But again, Utah's got some versatility there with Jackson Benny potentially moving to strong safety and filling some roles there. But this looks to be primarily Nate Tillman's responsibility, and so I think this is going to be a time for him to step up and showcase his ability as a true freshman. So this is going to be an interesting one to monitor, especially with this next phase of the schedule coming up. Depth in the secondary is going to be tested. It's going to be important for players to step up because you've got Arizona State coming in, and obviously talking about Jordan Tyson, him leading the conference in receiving yards. Arizona State, I think, is anticipating getting their number 2 receiver back, Jalen Moss. They also have a big tight end in Mateer, not Mateer, but Mateer, who's a big body, big presence, big athlete. So there's, this secondary, they've got to find some answers, and I think that's going to be important. Then you get into BYU, and we know what BYU has on that offensive side of the ball. You get into Colorado, coming to Rice Eccles. Obviously, they're not performing up to the expectations that some had for them, but there's still a lot of talent at those skill positions. So it's going to be important for Utah to find some answers there. And I think they've got an idea with Nate Tillman, Jackson Benny, and Jeremiah Rock Caldwell potentially helping the depth there at safety. The next big topic here, redshirting Byrd Ficklin. I think this is something that has been talked about over the last couple of weeks. Is what is the plan for Byrd Ficklin? And I think what we've learned is he's kind of a priority. He's become the priority in that quarterback room now. So here's what Coach Whittingham had to say about Byrd Ficklin.
Very pleased with what Byrd's done. I can tell you that much right now. I would say that there is not a concerted effort right now to redshirt Byrd. We're going to play him, if he's needed, obviously, and then any experience that we can get him. And so I think the road we've been going down is the road we'll continue to go down. And like I said, he's really made the most of his snaps and has looked very poised and very in control when he's been out there. For a true freshman, he's seems to be very mature and handles his business very well. Very pleased with what Byrd's done.
All right. So, like Whittingham said there is not a concerted effort to redshirt Byrd Ficklin. And I think that's really interesting. Obviously, we've seen Byrd Ficklin in 4 games so far. He's amassed 106 passing yards, 91 rushing yards, and has made some really impressive plays through the air and on the ground. Especially, you go back to that West Virginia game just a couple weeks ago, had the big throw to Larry Simmons for 40+ yards, made the run weaving through traffic. And I think there's a lot of excitement for Byrd Ficklin, and rightfully so. I think I think we're seeing him emerge as the priority in that quarterback room. Now, obviously, sophomore Isaac Wilson has held the backup title. But I think we're seeing Ficklin emerge as the priority there. And so with Ficklin, stepping up and getting these opportunities in these late games, I think it's just going to benefit him so much as we get into his 2nd and 3rd year potentially at Utah. And obviously, I know that there's a lot of concern about him playing early and what it means and the possibility of him being poached by other programs. You go back to spring ball, and I can say that Ficklin was getting interest from programs back east in the Midwest, and he he declined all the interest in him, and he sees a future at Utah. I know there's a lot of love for Utah, for the program here, because Utah gave him the opportunity at quarterback that no other program recruiting him at the time outside of Texas State was willing to give him. And I think that's something that stuck with Byrd Ficklin. I think there's a lot of buy-in with the program and with Jason Beck in this offense. And I think there should be a lot of excitement in getting him on the field in these types of situations, these late game situations where you're up, it's garbage time, and just getting him on the field, I think is really beneficial for him. And obviously, with the red shirt, right, there's a lot of concern about Utah not redshirting him. I think we all go back to Tyler Huntley and what sort of impact that had on him, burning the red shirt his freshman year, what that could have meant for him, potentially coming back in 2020 after that 2019 season. But I think it's important to understand and accept that this is a totally different world than just those few years ago with Tyler Huntley. This is a very different landscape in college football and in college athletics, essentially with the volatility of roster construction. You need to use the guys that you've got, and you can't be concerned with redshirting a player. You need to use the talent that you have available. And again, it's not that Utah's using him to they're just getting him opportunities, getting him reps, getting Devin Dampier off the field. And I think that's really, really valuable. So, another thing to consider with with this decision to get Ficklin these opportunities and not be concerned about redshirting him is the NCAA is also considering adjusting eligibility to a 5-for-5 eligibility clock, where you don't have a redshirt year, you just have 5 seasons of eligibility. That has been something that's been discussed over the last couple of years, and it's something that I know Utah is weighing and believes is close to passing. And so that's something to consider when we're talking about red shirts. Is we're very close to red shirts just not being a thing anymore. And I think that's important to consider here. Is the NCAA is discussing the potential of adopting just this 5-for-5 eligibility clock, where players come into college and you just have 5 seasons to play. You don't have to worry about a redshirt year. And as we've seen, over the last couple of years, is you can get a medical redshirt and a medical waiver. Those, I don't want to say are easy to get, but we've seen that they are pretty easy to get in most instances. So I wouldn't be concerned with Ficklin's eligibility at all. I would say just embrace these opportunities that he's getting on the field, because it's going to benefit him so much more, down the road with his development and with his potential to take over whenever Devin Dampier moves on from the program. So yeah, I think those are important things to consider there. And then just the final thing here from Coach Whittingham is obviously the Big 12 race. And we are only into week 7 of the season now. And you're starting to see the conference take shape. I think we all understand that Texas Tech is in a tier of its own. And Whittingham said as much. He said, and I quote, "I think there's probably 4 or 5, maybe 6 teams that still have a legit shot at winning the conference, but it's all got to go through Texas Tech right now." And I think we all see the same thing. We all see Texas Tech on a tier of their own, with everybody else competing for the other spot in the Big 12 title race. So, these next few games for Utah in particular, you've got Arizona State, you've got BYU, and then, Colorado may not be the team that we thought, but Cincinnati is. So you've got 3 of the next 4 weeks against the top contenders in the Big 12. It's time for Utah to make some hay, to get back to taking care of home field. That's something that was brought up in the press conference, that Utah's 0-5 over the last 2 years at home in conference play. And Whittingham was baffled. He said, that sucks. And I think this is the most important game now on the schedule. You had your opportunity against Texas Tech. Unfortunately, context there, you dropped the ball. It doesn't matter. That game's in the rearview mirror. This is the game now. This is everything. This will say a lot. These next 2 games will say a lot about the schedule, but this game in particular, you've got to get back to protecting your home field. It's important. It's vital that Utah, comes into this game with that mindset that they need to prove themselves, because they do. And that's where we're at with this. So that'll do it for me. that'll do it for this episode. I'll be back at it tomorrow. I'm going to have an ASU insider joining me. I believe I'm going to get Damon Allred of AZ Sports down there in the Phoenix area. And so excited to talk to Damon about Arizona State and going back and forth about this matchup. So that's going to be our Wednesday episode. And then Thursday, again, we're going to be going live with the podcast at 8 o'clock, followed up by a Twitter space where we pass the mic around and hear from everybody. So really excited for what's to come this week, and appreciate everybody for tuning in to the Utah Blockcast. Be back at it tomorrow. Signing off.